Hey, what's up? My name's Nigel, and in today's video, I'm going to be teaching you everything I know about working with and grading Cinelike-D footage from Panasonic cameras. So if you didn't know, Panasonic cameras have a few different ways that you can capture an image using their picture profiles. On the high end, you have Vlog, which is typically found in cameras like this. This is the Panasonic S5, and you also see it in the GH5 and G9. And Vlog is going to give you the most dynamic range that you can expect, and it's best utilized when you're shooting in 10-bit color. Then on the low end, you have the basic picture profiles like natural and standard. Those are typically found on cameras like this. This is the GX85. Typically on lower end cameras like this, you just find natural or standard. What a lot of people do is they take those profiles and then they turn the saturation and the contrast down, and that gives them just a little bit of extra dynamic range to work with. But then sitting right in the middle, you have Cinelike-D, which is found on like the mid-tier cameras like the Panasonic G7 or the G85, which is what I'm shooting on right now. And Cinelike-D was designed by Panasonic to give you the most dynamic range that you can expect from an 8-bit camera. So it's not going to be as flat as Vlog, but it's definitely going to be more flat than something like natural or standard. The highlights are taken down a bit and the shadows are lifted, so it gives you the most dynamic range you can expect from these mid-tier cameras. So what I'm going to do today is take you into Premiere, and we're going to go into how I work with and grade this footage. I'm not a professional colorist by any means, and I kind of just want to quickly take you through my process of working with Cinelike-D footage. But before we do that, I think it's really important to talk about acquisition. It doesn't matter how good of a colorist you are, if you capture an image poorly, it's going to be really difficult to work with. So for this shot that we're working with, I kind of want to show you what my setup was. I was shooting on the Panasonic G85, and I was actually using a really cheap lens. It was the 7 Artisans 25mm f1.8. It's like a $70 lens, but it has a really nice vintage quality to it. I really like it, even though it's really cheap. And I was using a Nissi variable ND filter. I used the Field Monitor app on my iPhone, and that gave me the ability to check my exposure, check my focus with the focus peaking feature on that app. And I could even punch in and like really check critical focus, which is pretty cool. The Field Monitor app is great and it works well with Panasonic cameras. So before we jump into Premiere, I do want to thank the sponsor of today's video, which is Skillshare. Skillshare is an online learning community for creative and curious people. Whether you're into photography or video or design, Skillshare has thousands of classes to help you gain more knowledge in whatever subject that you're interested in. So one Skillshare class that I would definitely recommend is Advanced Video Editing with Adobe Premiere Pro, taught by Jordy. If you're just getting started in video editing and you have Adobe Premiere Pro, this is a great class to just really up your knowledge on how to use the program, and it's going to help you a lot create videos faster and learn the ins and outs of that editing program. What's really cool is that the first 1,000 people who click the link in the description below are going to get a free trial to Skillshare. So definitely don't sleep on this. Click the link in the description below and get a free trial of a Skillshare membership. Once again, big thanks to Skillshare for sponsoring this video. So now let's jump into Adobe Premiere and start editing some Cinelike-D footage. Okay, so here we are in Adobe Premiere, and I have my Cine-D footage. I'm going to drag one of them into the timeline, and I'm just going to go find a shot that I want to work with. This is our shot in Cine-D, and as you can see, I exposed for my face. There's a little bit of blown out areas in the background. That's no worries though. What we're going to do is go into our color tab. This is where we're going to start making most of our adjustments. First thing I'm going to do is kind of zoom it into about 100%, and I'm going to go to my face, and the first thing is I'm going to fix the skin tone issue. You can't really see it too much just because there's so much green in the background, but Cine-D does kind of give this really weird greenish yellow tint to the skin tones, which a lot of people don't like. So the first thing I'm going to do is go to HSL secondary, and I'm going to grab my skin tones. So I'm going to take a little eyedropper, click it on a spot that's a pretty well exposed part of my skin. And then what I'm going to do is go to the gray, and I'm going to start adjusting these colors right here so that it kind of singles out all of the skin tone. Let's see, now we can see that it's mostly just my skin tone that's going to be affected. I don't really care if it affects my hat too, because now I have my skin kind of singled out, and there's a couple other areas, but I'm not going to worry about that much. So what I'm going to do is Instead of having the 1 color wheel, I'm gonna have the 3. So I'm gonna take the midtones, and since the skin does kind of tend to tint a little bit to green in Cine-D, what you can do is take the midtones, which is typically where the skin is gonna be, and you can push it away from green a little bit towards the magenta and the red. So then we can toggle the HSL secondary off. As you can see, it's very subtle, but the green tint is taken out and there's a little bit more life in my skin. So that's where we want it. So the next thing we're gonna do is, still staying zoomed in so we can see our skin, is I'm gonna go to the opacity and click the free draw. What I'm gonna do is just select another part of my skin. And what we're gonna do is open up your lumetri scopes. I have them here already. This line right here on your vector scope is gonna kind of show you where your skin tones should sit. The skin tones are a little bit too much towards the magenta, so what I'm gonna do is actually go and change the entire image to lean a little bit more towards yellow. So it's landing right in the middle. So now, if we take off this mask, then we can go from a before and an after, before, after. And now we have basically a corrected image. Skin tones look a lot better, and the entire image overall just looks like it's properly color balanced. So the only thing that I would do next is click my waveforms, and usually I want the shadows to actually land right about here. So because this is Cinelike-D, my shadows have been lifted a little bit. So what you can do is just take your shadows and bring them down so it's a little bit more of a balanced image. And now I would say that this is a pretty well corrected image. So now we can actually go into the grading portion of how you would give your shot a certain look. So the way we're gonna do that is I'm gonna go up here to the lumetri color. I'm gonna go add lumetri color effect. So now what that's gonna do is if you go to your effects controls, you'll notice that there's 2 lumetri colors on here now. So now we're gonna be doing the actual grading portion. So what I'm gonna do first is I'm going to add a little bit more contrast just because I want my image to pop a little bit more. And I'm gonna go to the curves, and something that I always like to do is just take the saturation from the shadows down a little bit so that my blacks don't have any weird color cast to them. I'm gonna go into my color wheels. So I'm gonna try bringing my shadows into a cooler tone. Sometimes when you bring your shadows to a cool and bring your highlights to a warm, it creates a pretty pleasing effect. And then I might add a little bit of brightness back to the midtones. What's kind of cool is if you click this effects button, you can kind of toggle off your edit so you can kind of see what you're affecting. So right now I think I put a little bit too much coolness into the shadows, so I'm gonna take that back. I think I might actually take my shadows down a little bit more just because they look a little bit lifted. That's something that Cine-D definitely has a tendency of doing. I'm gonna go back to my curves, and I'm gonna take some of the saturation out of the highlights because I noticed that there's kind of like a yellow and green tint to a lot of my highlights. So I'm gonna go back to where I took the saturation out of the shadows. I'm gonna do the exact same thing to the highlights. So I'm gonna take the highlights down a little bit more in my basic correction and then bring my exposure back down to the normal spot. Now the one thing that you can do is if you notice that maybe your subject's face is a little bit dark, you can go back to HSL secondary and find their face again. If your subject's face is a little bit dark, just isolate it with your HSL secondary, then you can bring it up a little bit, and that will boost the exposure on just the face. And you can even sharpen it a bit too if you were slightly out of focus. And if we toggle this on and off, you can see that I've boosted the exposure on my face. If we toggle them both off, this is what we started with, and then that's what we ended with. We have a nicely graded image that looks natural. The skin tones look how they're supposed to look. And honestly, it wasn't really that hard. There are plugins like Film Convert that can make this process a lot easier. And as a shameless plug, my Cine-D LUTs actually do correct a lot of the skin tone issues that you find in Cinelike-D footage. So yeah, that is how I work with Cinelike-D footage. I hope that you got something out of this video. If you did, it'd be really cool if you hit the like button. And if you'd like to watch some more of my videos, you can click on either side of my face. Thank you so much for stopping by, and I'll catch you all next time. Later.